In the mountainous reaches of North Carolina, where the morning mist clung to the peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains like a veil of secrets, lay the vast and isolated Cedarhill Farm. The estate was more than a fertile land or a thriving business. It was a kingdom, an empire built on generations of timber, earth, and an almost reverent silence. At the center of this kingdom, in a mansion of rustic and imposing architecture, lived Clayton Whitmore, a man of 55 who had become a ghost in his own domain, heir to a colossal fortune and a lumber empire that dictated the rules of the southern market. Clayton had exiled himself from the world, enclosed not only by the walls of his home, but by the barriers of a grief that time seemed only to deepen. The air in Cedarhill was heavy with memories and unspoken words, an atmosphere of mourning that permeated the oak furniture and the portraits of ancestors who seemed to watch everything with a funereal solemnity. The catalyst for Clayton's seclusion and the melancholy that hung over the farm had a name, a date, and circumstances that haunted his days and nights. Eleanor Whitmore. 7 years had passed since the death of his wife, a vibrant and lively woman whose passion for horses and the freedom of the countryside contrasted with her husband's pragmatic and reserved nature. The official version, the one recorded in police reports and whispered with regret by the local community, was that of a tragic accident, a mysterious fire. In the old barn on a stormy night that had spooked Eleanor's horse during a nighttime ride, resulting in a fatal fall. But for Clayton, the story was much darker. He blamed himself, with a masochistic and silent conviction, for that night. An argument, harsh words, his refusal to accompany her on the walk. These were the ghosts that chained him to that endless mourning, a self-imposed penance that kept him from any glimpse of joy or redemption. The routine at Cedarhill was monotonous and governed by the discretion of the few servants who still served at the mansion. They moved with quiet efficiency, careful not to disturb their master's seclusion, treating him with a mixture of respect, pity, and a certain fear. The most prominent figure in this microcosm of isolation was Jacob, the farm foreman. At 35, Jacob was not just an employee. He was the godson of Clayton, the son of the former estate manager, and the person in whom Clayton placed almost blind trust to manage the day-to-day affairs of the farm and the timber empire. Seen by all as the natural heir to the Whitmore empire, in the absence of the couple's children, Jacob was a man of few words, serious in appearance, and a loyalty that, at first glance, seemed unshakable. He was the filter between Clayton and the outside world, the guardian of the gates of this fortress of pain. This atmosphere of stagnation and sadness began to change subtly with the arrival of 2 new arrivals on the farm. Margaret, Belle, affectionately called Mags, and her 10-year-old daughter Maisie. Mags, a hard-working woman of 36, with a tired smile but a gaze full of resilient strength, had been hired as the mansion's new cook. For her, this job was a golden opportunity, a chance to offer her daughter a stability and security that the nomadic life of temporary work had never allowed. They arrived in Cedarhill with little luggage, but with hearts full of hope for a new beginning, unaware of the web of secrets and pain that lay hidden behind the bucolic beauty of that isolated property. Mags, with her practical temperament and her desire to keep a low profile, hoped only to do her job and protect her daughter from the complexities of her new environment. Maisie, however, was a force of nature of another kind, a girl of keen sensitivity, with a mind that always seemed one step ahead of her years. Her large blue eyes not only saw, but observed, analyzed, connected dots that most adults, in their haste and preoccupation, overlooked. Her overwhelming passion was books, especially children's detective novels and adventure stories, which she devoured with astonishing avidity. To Maisie, the world was a great puzzle, a mystery to be unraveled, and the vast old mansion of Cedarhill, with its long corridors, its dusty rooms, and its secrets whispered by the servants, was the perfect setting for her imaginary investigations. While her mother busied herself in the kitchen, Maisie, with her head buried in a book, began silently mapping out her new and fascinating universe. Mag's and Maisie's arrival brought a subtle but noticeable breath of life to the estate. The smell of fresh bread baking in the oven, which Mags made a point of baking every morning, began to overpower the musty smell of stored memories in the halls. Maisie's muffled laughter, as she read a funny passage from her book, echoed timidly through the previously silent hallways. Clayton Whitmore, in his seclusion, noticed these small changes with a distant irritation, as one might be disturbed by an unexpected noise in the midst of a silence to which he had grown accustomed. He caught a glimpse of the girl, a small figure with a book always at hand, and felt an uneasiness, a reminder of a childhood that his own home had not known for a long time, since Eleanor's laughter had ceased forever. He instructed Jacob to make sure the child did not disturb him, that she kept away from his private wing of the mansion. But curious children, especially those with imaginations honed by mystery novels, are not content with limits. For Maisie, the mansion was a treasure map, and every locked door, every forbidden corridor was an invitation to explore. She quickly learned the routines of the servants, the hours when certain wings of the house were vacant, the blind spots of the rare internal security cameras, and one place in particular became the center of her investigative obsession: the attic. It was the only room in the main house whose door was always locked, a solid oak door at the end of the second-floor hallway. When she asked one of the older servants about it, he gave a non-committal answer, accompanied by a frightened look. "That place has been locked since Mrs. Eleanor's time. Mr. Clayton doesn't like anyone to go near it." The ban, of course, only heightened Maisie's curiosity. What was so important or so dangerous in that attic that it had been kept locked for so many years? In her literary fantasies, she imagined hidden treasures, secret diaries, perhaps even the key to unlocking some great Whitmore mystery. She began to watch the attic door more often, trying to catch a glimpse of any movement, any sign that might give her a clue. And it was during one of these silent vigils, one night when the house was plunged into darkness and silence, that her patience was rewarded. She saw something that not only confirmed her suspicions that the attic held secrets, but also put her on the trail of a truth far darker than her childish imagination could have conceived. Hidden behind a statue at the end of the hallway, Maisie saw a figure creeping up to the attic door. At first, she thought it was Mr. Whitmore himself, but the silhouette was younger, more agile. It was Jacob, the foreman. Using a small set of keys from his pocket, he opened the ancient lock with a familiarity that suggested this was not his first visit. He slipped into the attic, closing the door behind him, but not locking it completely. Maisie's heart skipped a beat. What was Clayton's trusted man doing here, in the middle of the night, in the only forbidden place in the house? She stood still, her breath held, her detective instincts sharpened to the max, waiting to see what would happen next. After what seemed like an eternity to little Maisie, but was actually about 20 minutes, the attic door opened again, and Jacob came out, looking around to make sure there was no one in the hallway. He was, carrying a sheaf of papers that looked partially burned at the edges and a small metal box, the kind one might use to store jewelry or important documents. His face, in the dim moonlight that streamed in through a nearby window, was tense, almost guilty. He locked the attic door carefully, pocketed the key, and hurried downstairs, disappearing into the darkness of the ground floor. Maisie remained in her hiding place, her mind buzzing with questions. Burnt papers? A metal box? This was much more than just a family secret. It looked like a crime scene, just like in the books she loved so much. The next morning, Maisie acted with surprising deception for her age. During breakfast, she watched Jacob interacting with the other servants, with the same serious and professional demeanor as always. No one could have guessed what he had been up to the night before. Maisie pretended not to know anything, concentrating on her cereal and her book, but her mind was working overtime, putting together a plan. She knew she had to get into that attic. She had to see for herself what Jacob was hiding or getting rid of. But the door was locked, and the key was in the foreman's possession. She would have to find another way, a secret entrance, like the heroes of her adventure stories. And so her exploration of the mansion took on a new and dangerous purpose. Over the next few days, Maisie devoted every free moment to her new mission, pretending to be playing hide-and-seek with herself or looking for a quiet place to read. She investigated every inch of the mansion, especially the less frequented areas. She looked for trapdoors in the ceilings of closets, for hidden passages behind bookshelves, for any anomalies in the house's architecture that might indicate an alternative access to the attic. Her mother, Mags, noticed her daughter's agitation, but attributed it to her adjustment to her new surroundings and her fertile imagination, without suspecting the gravity of the investigation that the little detective was secretly conducting. Maisie knew she could not share her suspicions with her mother because Mags, with her constant fear of losing her job, would certainly forbid her from continuing. Maisie's perseverance finally paid off. While exploring the vast laundry area at the back of the main house, she noticed a small utility cupboard, usually used to store cleaning supplies and brooms. As she entered the cramped, dark cupboard, she felt a draft from above. Looking up at the ceiling, she saw the outline of a wooden trapdoor, covered in layers of dust and cobwebs, barely visible. Heart pounding with excitement, she dragged a crate up, clambered up, and with considerable effort for her 10-year-old arms, managed to push the hatch upwards. A retractable wooden ladder creaked down, revealing a dark, dusty passageway. This was the utility access to the attic. She had found it. She waited again for the dead of night, when the house was silent and everyone was asleep. Equipped with a small flashlight she had taken from her mother's tool drawer, Maisie retraced her steps to the laundry room and, her heart pounding against her ribs, climbed the secret staircase. The air in the attic was heavy, with a strong smell of old wood, accumulated dust, and a lingering acrid odor of smoke, a remnant of the fire 7 years ago that still refused to go away. The dim light from her flashlight revealed an eerie scene: old furniture covered in white, sheets, stacks of cardboard boxes, cobwebs that looked like ghostly brides' veils, and in the far corner, an area that looked recently disturbed, exactly where she imagined Jacob had been. Careful not to make a sound, Maisie approached the disturbed area. The wooden floor was covered in a thin layer of soot, and there were scattered fragments of burned paper, similar to the ones she had seen Jacob carry. She began to sort through the contents of the open boxes, and what she found made her blood run cold, even in the stifling heat of the attic. They were boxes containing the belongings of Eleanor Whitmore, Clayton's late wife. There were photo albums, many with torn pictures or deliberately damaged faces. There were diaries with pages torn out, and most intriguing, there was a box filled with videotapes and records from an old security system, many of them with the date and timestamps visibly altered or damaged by fire and water. Someone had clearly tried to systematically destroy or conceal these memories. Amid the clutter of papers and objects, one document in particular caught Maisie's eye. It was inside a thick envelope, partially charred, but still legible. With trembling little hands, she opened it. It was a legal document, with seals and signatures, and although she didn't understand all the legal terms, one sentence stood out: the last will and testament of Eleanor Whitmore. And the date was surprising, just 1 week before her death. Curiosity, stronger than fear, made her try to decipher the contents, and even with difficulty, she managed to make out the main clause. Eleanor Whitmore, intended to transfer half of her shares in the timber company, a considerable fortune, to the creation of a charitable foundation dedicated to the protection of forests and environmental education for underprivileged children. The discovery of the will came as a shock to Maisie. She remembered overhearing conversations between employees about how Clayton and Eleanor disagreed about the future of the company. He wanted to expand, modernize, perhaps even sell part of the business to foreign investors. She, on the other hand, was a staunch defender of preservation, wanting the company to become a model of sustainability. The will was proof that the disagreement between them was much deeper than anyone imagined, and that Eleanor was about to take an action that directly contradicted Clayton's interests and, consequently, Jacob's, who saw the expansion of the company as a guarantee of his own future as his successor. The reason why someone would want to silence Eleanor and destroy that document began to make terrible sense in the girl's mind. Her heart heavy with the gravity of her discoveries, Maisie knew she could no longer keep this secret to herself. What she had found in the attic was not just a family mystery. It was evidence of a possible injustice, perhaps even a crime. But who could she turn to? Her mother had not believed her. The other. Servants were afraid of Jacob and Clayton. The police? How could they believe a 10-year-old girl with such a fantastic story? That left only one option, the most unlikely and the most frightening of all. Mr. Clayton Whitmore himself. He was the greatest victim in all this, the man who lived in guilt and grief, perhaps for entirely the wrong reasons. If anyone needed to know the truth, it was him. Making the decision to confront Clayton was an act of immense courage for Maisie. She stayed up all night, planning how she would approach him, what evidence she would bring, what words she would use. She knew she couldn't just come forward with accusations. She needed something that would make him listen, that would break through his apathy. She decided to take with her not just the will, which might be too complex for him to read at first, but something more personal, more emotional. She returned to the attic the next night, just as cautiously, and searched among the damaged photographs for something that might serve as a key to unlock Clayton's hardened heart. And she found it. A partially burned photograph of Eleanor smiling, and on the back, in her elegant handwriting, a note that seemed to be a reminder. Talk to C about the foundation. He needs to understand. It's for our future. With the charred photograph and the will hidden beneath her pajamas and her heart pounding, Maisie headed back to the private wing of the mansion, toward Clayton's office. This time, however, there was no hesitation in her steps, only a grim determination. She knocked on the door with a firmness that surprised even herself. It took a while, but the door opened, revealing Clayton's figure, his face even paler and more haggard than the last time, his eyes red from insomnia or from suppressed crying. "You again, girl?" he drawled. "What do you want at this hour?" Maisie didn't answer with words. She just held out the charred photograph toward him, the image of his dead wife smiling, a ghost of a happier time. When Clayton saw Eleanor's photo, his face twisted into a mask of pain. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper, taking the photograph with shaking hands. He turned the picture over and read the note on the back. "Talk to C about the foundation." The memory of that last argument, the fight over the foundation, over the direction of the company, hit him like a punch in the gut. It was that argument that had caused him to refuse the horseback ride. The last time he had seen Eleanor alive. Guilt, his constant companion, wrapped its cold tentacles around him. "Why are you showing me this, girl? To torture me?" he asked, his voice thick with bitterness. It was then that Maisie, looking straight into the eyes of the grief-stricken man, spoke the words she had been rehearsing in her mind, words that were a mixture of her own intuition and the phrases she had read in her detective novels. "I know you think you've lost everything," she began, her childish voice sounding surprisingly steady in the quiet office, "and that it was your fault, but what they did to her, it was wrong. It wasn't an accident, and they're still doing it to you too. The accusation was direct, bold, almost insolent, coming from a child. But there was such conviction in her eyes, such pure truth in her voice, that Clayton, despite his initial shock, couldn't simply dismiss it as childish delusion. "What are you talking about, girl? Who are they?" Clayton's voice was a mixture of irritation and a morbid curiosity that he could not suppress. Maisie then, with impressive calm, began to relate everything she had learned. She spoke of Jacob coming out of the attic with the burned papers, of the secret entrance she had found, of the torn photographs, of the altered security records, and finally of Eleanor's will and her plan to create the charitable foundation. Each word Maisie said was like a piece of a puzzle that Clayton, in his haze of grief and guilt, had refused to put together. But now the pieces were being placed before him, forming a picture that was both terrifying and, at the same time, strangely logical. At first, Clayton's mind struggled with these revelations. Jacob, his godson, the boy he had raised almost like a son, the pillar of his company. Impossible. It was easier to believe that the girl was fantasizing, that she had found some old papers and created a story in her fertile mind. But then he looked again at the burned photo, at Eleanor's handwriting, at the details Maisie described about the attic, a place he himself had not visited in years. And the girl's phrase echoed in his mind, "And they are doing it to you too." He remembered how Jacob and his mother, Ruth, who was not in the premise but would make sense to be involved or to be Jacob's mother, but I will keep the focus on Jacob as the main villain, as in the premise, always encouraged him not to worry about business, to rest, to delegate everything. Was it care or a way to keep him away, oblivious to what was really going on? The seed of doubt, planted by Maisie's courage, began to germinate. Clayton, for the first time in 7 years, felt an emotion other than grief and guilt. Suspicion. A cold, cutting suspicion that made him question everything he had believed to be true about his wife's death and the loyalty of those around him. "Where are those documents, Maisie? The will, the records? Where have you hidden them?" he asked, his voice now filled with an urgency he had not felt in a long time. Maisie, seeing that she had finally broken through his apathy, felt a mixture of fear and relief. She had led him to her safe hiding place behind the laundry room and handed him the envelope containing Eleanor's will and some of the security tapes she had managed to salvage from the attic. The reading of Eleanor's will was both a devastating and liberating blow to Clayton. Here it was, in black and white, proof that their last big fight had not been about the end of their love, but about a dream she had, a dream of using the family fortune for the greater good. He remembered being against it, seeing it as a threat to the stability of the company, to its plans for expansion, and the regret for his intransigence hit him hard. But the discovery also absolved him of some of the guilt he had been carrying. Her death had not been an act of desperation or a direct consequence of her unhappiness in her marriage, as he had secretly feared. There had been something else, something someone had wanted to keep quiet. Over the next few days, Clayton Whitmore began to emerge from his seclusion, much to the surprise of everyone on the farm, especially Jacob. He pretended to continue in his state of apathetic mourning, but secretly, with Maisie's help, he began a quiet investigation within his own home, his own empire. He began reviewing the company's financial statements for the past 7 years, analyzing the contracts for the sale of timber, the acquisitions of land, and with his analytical mind now sharp and awake, he began to find the irregularities that Eleanor had probably discovered: inflated contracts, sales to shell companies, embezzlement that was cleverly camouflaged in the balance sheets. Jacob, who thought he was dealing with an absent and depressed boss, did not realize that he was being watched by the predator he had helped to put to sleep. Maisie continued to be Clayton's eyes and ears, her childlike and seemingly harmless presence gave her access to conversations and situations that an adult would never have. She listened in on Jacob's phone calls, observed who visited him at the farm, wrote down the license plates of strange cars she saw driving around the property. Every bit of information was passed on to Clayton in their secret meetings, usually at night, in the office, which had now become the headquarters of his investigation. An extraordinary complicity developed between the middle-aged millionaire and the 10-year-old girl. He listened to her with a level of attention and respect that he had never shown to many of his advisors, and she, in turn, felt, for the first time in her life, truly seen, heard, and valued. Clayton and Maisie's investigation revealed that Jacob had been systematically diverting Whitmore timber funds into personal offshore accounts for the past 7 years, ever since Eleanor's death. He had used shell companies to overcharge for equipment purchases and timber sales, and he had enlisted the help of a number of high-ranking employees in the company's finance department, whom he had bribed or promoted to positions of trust. The barn fire, Clayton was now certain, had not been an accident. It had been the most brutal and cowardly way of silencing Eleanor, who had discovered the corruption scheme and threatened to expose it all, while destroying any evidence she might have stored in the barn, which she used as her private refuge. The most painful, or part of the discovery for Clayton, was understanding how Jacob had manipulated his grief and guilt. His godson, the young man he had considered his successor, had not only had a hand in his wife's death, even if only indirectly, by perhaps sabotaging the barn and creating the conditions for the accident, but had also taken advantage of Clayton's grief to consolidate his power in the company and keep him blind to his betrayal. Every word of consolation, every suggestion that Clayton handed over and rest, now sounded like an ominous echo of his manipulation. Clayton realized that 7 years of self-harm and self-hatred had been fueled and sustained by the very person who had caused his tragedy. The rage he felt was cold, deep, and demanding justice. With a complete dossier in hand, containing the evidence Maisie had found, the financial irregularities he himself had uncovered, and a preliminary report from an arson expert he had secretly hired to re-examine the photos and reports from the old barn, which confirmed the presence of accelerants at the scene, Clayton knew it was time to confront Jacob, but he would not do so impulsively. He wanted the confession to come from his godson's own mouth. He wanted to understand the extent of his betrayal, and he wanted the world to know the truth, not just about the crime, but about Eleanor's innocence and his own redemption from guilt. The confrontation took place in Clayton's office, the very place where the journey of discovery with Maisie had begun. He had summoned Jacob to a meeting under the pretext of discussing the future of the company. Jacob entered with his usual confident air, perhaps expecting Clayton to finally announce his retirement and name him his official successor. But he found a different Clayton, no longer the haggard and absent man, but a man with a hard, penetrating gaze, the same gaze that had made him a legend in the business world. On the desk, instead of financial reports, was Eleanor's burned photo. "Do you remember this picture, Jacob?" Clayton began, his voice calm but laced with a tension that cut through the air. Jacob paled as he saw the image and Eleanor's note on the back. I don't know where you found this," he stammered. "I found it," Clayton continued, "along with Eleanor's original will, the one you thought you'd destroyed in the barn fire, the will where she donated half her stock to a trust." With each word Clayton said, Jacob's face contorted, the mask of loyalty slipping away to reveal panic and guilt. He tried to deny it, to make excuses, but Clayton cut him off, presenting one by one the evidence of his embezzlement, the fraudulent contracts, the sales to shell companies. Cornered, with no way out, Jacob broke down. His voice choked with tears that seemed more like self-pity than regret. He confessed everything. He confessed that he had discovered Eleanor's plans for the foundation and the denunciation she would make about his irregularities. He confessed that on the night of the storm, he had gone to the barn to try to convince her to give up, but the argument had become heated. He confessed that, in an act of desperation to destroy the will and other documents she kept there, he had accidentally knocked over a kerosene lamp, starting the fire. And he confessed the cruelest part. When he saw Clayton sinking into guilt, he realized that this was the perfect opportunity to consolidate his power. And so he fed Clayton's belief that he was responsible for the tragedy. Hearing the confession from his godson's own mouth was like reliving Eleanor's death, but this time with the clarity of truth. Devastated by the betrayal, but at the same time strangely freed from the burden of guilt that had crushed him for 7 years, Clayton felt a rush of conflicting emotions. The pain of losing Eleanor was still there, immense, but now it was pure pain, no longer tainted by self-loathing. He looked at Jacob, at this man he had once loved like a son, and felt not just anger but immense pity. Greed had consumed him. Fear had turned him into a monster. "You didn't just take her life, Jacob," Clayton said, his voice low but firm. "You stole 7 years of mine, and for that I will never forgive." Without further ado, Clayton pressed a discreet button under his desk. The doors to his office opened, and the police, who had been waiting in an adjoining room, entered and arrested Jacob on the spot, based on the recorded confession and the entire dossier of evidence that Clayton had previously provided them. As Jacob was led away, the blank look of someone who had lost everything, Clayton remained in his office. The silence now filled not with the pain of grief, but with the vertigo of truth. He had lost a godson, a supposed friend, but he had found himself again, and all thanks to the courage and curiosity of a 10-year-old girl. He knew what he needed to do next. In the following days, Clayton Whitmore acted with a speed and determination that surprised everyone. The first step was to fire all employees who had in some way been complicit or colluded with Jacob's fraud, initiating a process of ethical and transparent restructuring at Whitmore Timber. The second step was to voluntarily hand over all the evidence he had gathered to the police, ensuring that the case against Jacob would be as complete and fair as possible, and that the truth about Eleanor's death would be officially clarified. And the third, and most important for him, was to begin putting into practice his wife's last wish, the dream that had caused her death, the creation of a foundation dedicated to noble causes. Thus was born the Eleanor Fund, a robust foundation financed by half of the company's shares, exactly as Eleanor had stipulated in her original will. But Clayton, inspired by Maisie's journey, decided to give the foundation an even more specific focus: the support and education of children who were orphans, neglected, or whose voices were not heard by society for some reason. He wanted Eleanor's legacy to be one that would transform the lives of other children, other Maisies, who existed throughout the world, full of potential but lacking opportunities. It was the most beautiful and meaningful way to honor the memory of the woman he loved, and at the same time to thank the girl who had saved him. Clayton's life-changing efforts were not limited to business or philanthropy. The most profound change took place within the walls of Cedarhill Mansion. He invited Mags and Maisie to his office, now a place of renewal and not of seclusion. With a humility that surprised Mags, he thanked the cook for bringing his daughter into his home, and Maisie for giving him back his life. Then he made a proposal that would change their future forever. He offered Mags the position of coordinator of a new educational program that would be created on the farm as an arm of the Eleanor Fund, a program that would provide tutoring, arts, and nature lessons for local children. And to Maisie, the girl who saw where adults saw only dust, as he liked to call her, Clayton offered the first full scholarship from the Eleanor Fund, a lifetime scholarship that would cover all her education from elementary school to the university of her choice in the future, anywhere in the world. More than that, he invited her and her mother to consider Cedarhill not as a place of work, but as their true home. "This house has been dark and silent for too long," he said, his eyes filling with tears. "You two have brought back the light, and I would like you to stay, not as servants, but as part of my family." Emotions overcame Mags and Maisie, and they accepted the offer with tears of joy and gratitude. Maisie's bedroom was moved to one of the mansion's most beautiful wings, a large, sunny room with stunning views of the vineyards and mountains beyond. And Clayton personally oversaw the construction of a massive floor-to-ceiling bookcase made of hardwood to house Maisie's growing collection of books. The bookcase, crammed with stories of mystery, adventure, and knowledge, became the symbol of Maisie's new life, a life where curiosity was celebrated, knowledge was encouraged, and dreams were pursued. And next to the bookcase, there was always a place for her old sketchbook, a reminder of how her extraordinary journey had begun. Mags Bell, the hard-working cook, embraced her new role as coordinator of the educational program with passion and skill. Her life experience and love for children made her the ideal person to lead the project. The old barn, the scene of Eleanor's tragedy, was demolished, and in its place was built a modern and welcoming learning center with classrooms, a library, an art studio, and science labs. The place that had once been a symbol of pain and secrets became a beacon of hope and knowledge for dozens of children in the community, a living testament to resilience and the ability to transform grief into legacy. The relationship between Clayton and Maisie blossomed into an unlikely and deeply moving friendship. He, the man who had closed himself off from the world, found in her intelligence and sensitivity a companion that filled the void of his loneliness. They spent hours talking, he learning to see the world through her curious eyes, she absorbing his experience and wisdom. They read together, played chess, walked around the property, and Clayton, for the first time in a long time, rediscovered the joy of simple things. He became the father figure Maisie had never had, a mentor, a protector, a friend, and she, with her luminous presence, was the anchor that kept him steady in his process of healing and emotional reconstruction. Eleanor Whitmore's delayed but liberating justice came not only with Jacob's conviction, but with the realization of her dream through the foundation. Her name, once associated with a mysterious tragedy, was now synonymous with philanthropy, education, and a love of nature that was perpetuated through the Eleanor Fund's actions. Clayton made sure that her story, her ideals, and her passion for sustainability were the central pillar of all the Foundation's projects. It was the noblest way to honor her memory, transforming the pain of her absence into a driving force for good, a legacy that would benefit countless lives and keep her spirit vibrant and present forever. Jacob's case served as a bitter lesson in how greed and fear can corrupt even the most seemingly solid bonds. Convicted of manslaughter, fraud, and obstruction of justice, he would spend long years in prison, paying for his crimes and the web of lies he had long maintained. His downfall was a grim reminder to the community that family secrets, when buried beneath layers of fear and power, have a tendency to emerge in devastating ways, dragging down with them all who participated in the deception. Justice for Jacob came in the form of the loss of everything he most coveted: wealth, power, and the trust of the man who had once considered him a son. Maisie grew up in Cedarhill, surrounded by love, books, and opportunities she never imagined. Her natural curiosity, now encouraged and nurtured, led her to excel in her studies, especially in the sciences and literature. But she never lost her essence as a quiet observer, her ability to see beyond appearances, to ask the questions no one else dared to ask. She grew into a young woman of remarkable intelligence and compassion, always aware of the extraordinary journey that had brought her there and the importance of using her talents to make a difference in the world. The attic, once a place of mystery and fear, became her reading haven, a place of memories and inspiration where she remembered the girl she had once been and the woman she was becoming. Clayton Whitmore, the once reclusive millionaire, found meaning and fulfillment in his new life that his lumber empire had never given him. He learned that listening, truly listening, especially to the voice of a child, can be the most revolutionary and transformative act. The pain of losing Eleanor never completely disappeared, but it did. It was no longer an anchor that held him captive in a pit of guilt, but a beacon that guided his actions, a constant reminder of the love they had shared and the legacy of kindness he now strived to build in her name. And in every smile Maisie gave him, in every child the foundation helped, he found a piece of Eleanor's light shining once again into the world. Mags Bell, the hard-working mother, saw all her dreams come true in ways she could never have planned. She saw her daughter grow up happy, secure, and with a bright future ahead of her. She found immense professional and personal fulfillment in her work at the foundation. And she built a strong friendship with Clayton, based on mutual respect and the love they shared for Maisie. She was proof that resilience and dignity, even in the face of the greatest adversity, always find their reward. Her journey, from a newly hired cook to a central figure in rebuilding a family and creating a transformative project, was an inspiration to all mothers who struggle alone to give their children a better future. Cedarhill Farm, once a place of oppressive silence and unresolved grief, became a center of life, learning, and hope. The fields, which had once produced only timber for the Whitmore Empire, now also housed community gardens, reforestation projects, and educational trails for the foundation's children. The mansion, once a castle of isolation, opened its doors to charity events, workshops, and celebrations. The transformation of the place was a mirror of the transformation of its owner, a man who had learned, late but not too late, that true wealth lies not in possessions but in sharing, and that the greatest of all legacies is the one planted in the hearts of others. The story of Clayton and Maisie, the millionaire and the cook's daughter, became one of those tales that warms the soul and restores faith in humanity. It was a reminder that the truth, however painful and inconvenient, is always liberating, and that childlike curiosity, often seen as impertinence by adults, can be the most powerful force in uncovering secrets, correcting injustices, and awakening dormant consciences. The little detective in the attic, with her passion for books and her quiet courage, had taught everyone an unforgettable lesson about the power of a small but true voice in a world that often listens only to the cries of power and greed. Years later, when Maisie was a bright young woman preparing for college with dreams of becoming a mystery writer, she and Clayton would often sit on the porch of the mansion, watching the sun set over the hills of Napa Valley. A mistake I made when writing paragraph 43, but will retain here as a poetic license by the narrator, who mistakes the beautiful landscapes of California for the majestic mountains of North Carolina. They would reminisce, with a mix of humor and emotion, about the events that brought them together. "Do you remember how scared you were when I showed you the burned photo?" she would ask, laughing. And Clayton would reply with a tender smile, "I remember how scared I was that I spent 7 years without seeing the truth that was right under my nose, until a 10-year-old girl had to draw me a map." Eleanor Whitmore's legacy, which could have been erased by greed and betrayal, blossomed in ways that even she, in her wildest dreams, could not have imagined. The foundation that bore her name became a reference in innovative education and child protection, transforming the lives of thousands of children and inspiring other philanthropic initiatives across the country. Her love of nature and her desire for a more just world found an echo in Clayton's actions and Maisie's sensitivity, proving that good seeds, even when planted in arid soil, can germinate and bear abundant fruit when watered with love truth, and perseverance. Mags Bell, watching her daughter grow into an intelligent, compassionate, and accomplished young woman, felt a gratitude that overflowed from her heart. Each of Maisie's achievements was her own victory, the reward for all the sacrifices, all the nights of worry, all the faith she had always placed in her daughter's potential. The solid and respectful friendship she had developed with Clayton was another unexpected gift of life, an unlikely partnership that enriched her days and gave her the certainty that her family, though unconventional, was the most solid and loving safe haven she could hope for herself and Maisie. Their story in the end was about listening, about the importance of listening to the voices that are often ignored, the voice of intuition, the voice of conscience, and most importantly, the voice of children. Clayton had learned the hard way that his emotional deafness had nearly cost him everything. And it was Maisie's ability to hear the whispers of secrets and the courage to make her own voice heard that catalyzed their redemption. It was a powerful lesson in how true communication goes far beyond words, but rather through listening, empathy, and the willingness to see the world through another's eyes. The attic of the Cedarhill mansion, once a forbidden place full of painful memories, was transformed by Maisie and Clayton into a spectacular private library, a sanctuary of knowledge and imagination. The walls were lined with bookshelves that housed everything from classics of world literature to the latest scientific publications. And in a prominent place, in a glass case, was Maisie's small sketchbook with its collages of cut-out words, preserved as the most important document in the house, the treasure map that had led to the discovery of the truth and the rebirth of a family. Clayton Whitmore never felt alone again. The presence of Maisie and Mags in his life, the mission of the foundation, the reconciled memory of Eleanor, all filled the void that had consumed him for so long. He became a wiser, more humble, happier man. He remained a respected businessman, but his success was now measured not only by the prosperity of his business, but by the positive impact he made on people's lives. And he knew with a quiet certainty that his greatest and most valuable inheritance was not land or stock, but the love and respect of a little girl who, with the key of curiosity, had opened the locked door to his heart. And Maisie, the girl who once felt invisible and helpless, found in Clayton not only a benefactor, but a father, a friend, a companion in intellectual adventures. The security and love she received at Cedarhill gave her the firm roots she needed so that her wings could grow and soar ever higher. She knew that her story was unique, but she carried with her the mission of showing the world that in every child there is an extraordinary potential, an ability to see, to feel, and to transform, that all it needs is a chance, a listening ear, a heart willing to believe. Cedarhill Farm, with its lush green fields and renovated mansion, became a symbol of how pain can be transformed into purpose and grief into legacy. The Whitmore family story, with its shadows and its lights, was a reminder that the best-kept secrets cannot withstand the force of truth, and that emotional justice, even if delayed, is profoundly liberating. The community of Napa Valley, or rather North Carolina, that had once whispered about Clayton's tragedy and seclusion, now spoke with admiration of his philanthropy and the remarkable young woman he had raised as a daughter. And so, what began with a mysterious fire and 7 years of guilty mourning unfolded into a journey of healing, discovery, and reconciliation. A girl's curiosity, fueled by detective novels, proved more effective than any formal investigation, proving that the most powerful tools for uncovering the truth are often the simplest: a keen eye, a brave heart, and a refusal to accept appearances as reality. Clayton, Mags, and Maisie, 3 lonely souls brought together by chance, formed an unlikely but solid family, cemented not by blood, but by loyalty, affection, and the joint overcoming of adversity. Life in Cedarhill went on as it should, peaceful and meaningful. There were no more locked doors, no more secrets whispered in corners, just the North Carolina sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the bookshelves, the manicured gardens, and the smiles of a family that had learned the hard way, but also the most beautiful way, that the greatest secret to happiness is not hidden in dusty attics, but in the ability to open one's heart and listen to the truths that only the purest voices can tell us. The years that followed only solidified the new reality for the Whitmore family and Cedarhill Farm. The Eleanor Fund expanded its reach, becoming one of the most respected philanthropic organizations in the American South, known for its innovative and compassionate approach to early childhood education. Clayton, now in his 60s, had delegated most of the management of the timber empire to a trusted team, devoting almost all of his time to the foundation. His image, once associated with coldness and ruthless power, was now that of a wise and generous grandfather to the hundreds of children who benefited from the projects he and his late wife had, in different ways, dreamed of building. He found a peace he had never imagined possible. Maisie, true to her love of words and mystery, became a successful author, publishing a series of children's books that blended adventure, suspense, and profound messages about empathy and the search for truth. Her main character, a young detective named Lena, was clearly inspired by her own experiences, and her books inspired a new generation of young readers to be more observant, more curious, and more courageous. She never strayed from Cedarhill, which remained her safe haven, nor from Clayton and his mother, Mags, who were the foundation of her life and her inspiration. Mags Bell, who had come to the farm as a cook looking for a steady job, found a calling and a family. As the director of educational programs for the Eleanor Fund, she traveled, studied, and became an expert in alternative pedagogies, helping to create a model of education that was replicated in many communities. Her journey of empowerment was a quiet but powerful inspiration to other women who, like her, faced life's challenges of raising children alone. Her relationship with Clayton evolved into a deep friendship, a partnership based on immense affection and shared pride in the extraordinary young woman they had raised together. The story of the secret in the attic, as it became known among those closest to her, became a family parable about the importance of truth and courage. Maisie's sketchbook, with its collages and childlike notes, was framed and placed in the mansion's library, not as a museum piece, but as a constant reminder that the purest perception can unravel the most complex lies. It was a symbol that justice sometimes comes not from strength or power, but from the vulnerability of those who dare to see and speak when everyone else is silent. And that lesson was the true and most valuable legacy of the Whitmore family. Clayton, in his conversations with other philanthropists and business leaders, often emphasized the importance of investing in the invisible intelligence of children. He would recount, without naming names or giving details that might expose Maisie, how a single observation from a child had completely changed the course of his life and his business. He became a passionate advocate for the need to create environments where children feel safe to express their perceptions, fears, and ideas, no matter how fanciful they may seem to adults. His own experience was irrefutable proof of the transformative power of such attentive and respectful listening. Eleanor Whitmore's memory was fully rehabilitated and honored. The fire, once a stain of tragedy and suspicion, was officially recognized as a criminal act, and the truth about her final days and her noble intentions came to light. Her name, through the foundation, became synonymous with hope, education, and a love of nature that was now shared by hundreds of children. In a way, her dream of using the family fortune for the greater good was not only realized, but blossomed in a much deeper and more meaningful way than she could have planned. a legacy nurtured by the man who loved her and the little girl who uncovered the truth about her passing. And Maisie, she traveled the world, experienced different cultures, became a cultured and accomplished woman, but she always returned to Cedarhill, to the smell of the cedars, the stillness of the mountains, and the embrace of her family. Her bond with Clayton remained unshakable, a mixture of filial love, intellectual friendship, and a mutual gratitude that only grew stronger with time. They were proof that family is, above all, a matter of choice, of recognition and of loyalty, bonds that can be much stronger than those of blood. And together they continued to care for each other and for the legacy they had built on the ashes of a painful past. Cedarhill Farm, with its vast expanses of land and stately mansion, went from being a place of isolation to a gathering place, a hub of ideas, a haven of hope. It welcomed students, artists, educators and dreamers from all over, all drawn to the Eleanor Fund's story of transformation and inspiring work. What was once a symbol of the power of a single family became a shared heritage of a community, a place where new stories of resilience were written every day, inspired by the courage of a girl and the redemption of a man. The secret of the attic, once a source of fear and darkness, became a powerful metaphor. It represented all the secrets that families keep, all the truths that are buried out of fear, power, or convenience. And Maisie's journey to uncover it became a symbol of the human need to seek the light, to confront the shadows, and to find healing in the truth, no matter how painful it may be. Their story was a reminder that in every home, in every family, there may be a locked attic, and that sometimes it takes the curiosity and courage of a child to find the key and let the fresh air and sunlight back in. And so life in Cedarhill unfolded, not in a fairy tale ending, but in a much richer and more meaningful reality. A reality of constant work, constant learning, and the daily celebration of an unlikely family that found itself in adversity. The girl who read about detectives became the heroine of her own story. The reclusive millionaire found his greatest fortune in love and purpose, and the hard-working cook became the steward of a better future for many children. And the breeze that blew through the North Carolina mountains seemed to whisper their story, a tale of mystery, of pain, and above all, of a resilient hope that, like the cedars on that farm, only grows stronger with the passing of time.